The hall was silent the way graveyards are silent, not empty, but holding its breath. Calder Voss walked through the great doors of Ashenveil's throne room, and every person inside went still. Guards stood straighter. Advisors looked at their documents. A young maid carrying a tray of candles pressed herself so hard against the stone wall that the flames nearly went out. No one looked at him directly. No one ever did. Looking directly at the Alpha King of Ashenveil was the kind of thing people did once, briefly, and then never again. He was not a large man, though the room always made him feel like one. He was tall and lean, and moved the way old trees move in wind, not fast, but with the suggestion that stopping him would be someone else's problem. His dark coat was plain, no jewelry, no decoration. Men who needed decoration needed people to look at them. Calder Voss needed nothing of the sort. He sat on the throne, and the court began to move again, carefully, like water resuming flow around a stone. The council was presenting candidates. This happened every 2 years, formally, with documentation and family histories and political alliances carefully mapped like trade routes. 3 bonded mates before him, all of them chosen for what they brought to the crown. 2 had left quietly. 1 had simply disappeared from the record, and no one in the court ever asked about that either. He was not listening to the names. He was watching the door. The door on the left side of the hall, the servants' entrance, the one that led to the lower corridors, opened wrong. It opened too fast, with the confidence of someone who thought they were entering a storeroom. The woman who came through it was reading a piece of paper. She had dark hair tied back with what appeared to be a bandage. Her coat was a field medic's coat, worn at the elbows, with a satchel over one shoulder. Her hands were ink-stained. There was a dark smear on her collar that Calder's eyes identified, without his permission, as dried blood, someone else's. She took 3 steps into the throne room before she looked up. The room held its breath again. She looked around once, calm and unhurried, the way a person looks around when they have arrived at the wrong floor of a building, and then she looked at the paper again, and then she looked at Calder. She did not bow immediately. She finished reading the note. Then she bowed, quickly and practically, the kind of bow that meant the physical action had been completed, but not 1 extra second had been spent on it. "I was told the council chamber was through the left corridor," she said. Her voice was even and clear. "I need to see Lord Fenwick. His lungs are getting worse." No one in the room breathed. Calder looked at her for a long moment. His wolf, that deep interior thing he had kept leashed and quiet for 11 years, went absolutely, completely still. Not asleep, still, the way an animal goes still when something important happens nearby. "Lord Fenwick," Calder said, "is in the East Wing." "Then I've been given wrong directions twice," she said, and turned to leave. "Your name?" She turned back. "Lyra Ashwood, field medic, lower district, licensed under the—" "I know what you are." She nodded once, efficiently, as if this were useful information that had been confirmed, and walked back out through the wrong door. The court remained frozen for approximately 4 seconds. Then everyone began talking at once, and Calder raised one hand, and they stopped. He was still looking at the door she had walked through. His wolf was still very, very still. He had the palace physician check him for fever that evening. The physician was a careful, frightened man who understood that the king was not actually asking about fever. He confirmed, with professional caution, that the king was in perfect health. Calder dismissed him and sat alone for a long time, with the windows open and the city noise coming up from below. He created the position of court medic the following morning. It did not exist before that day. 3 different advisors drafted 3 different versions of the appointment document before he signed one. When Lyra Ashwood received her copy, she returned it with 6 corrections in red ink, and a note at the bottom asking who had approved the duty schedule, because it conflicted with her current patients in the lower district, and she could not simply abandon people mid-treatment. He read the corrections twice. Then he read them again. He approved the revised schedule. She arrived at the palace on a Tuesday and was given a room in the East Wing and a small office near the guards' barracks, which she immediately reorganized to her own system, moving things the palace staff had kept in specific places for decades. She did not ask permission. She explained, when the head housekeeper came to investigate the commotion, that the previous arrangement made no logistical sense for emergency access, and she had improved it. The head housekeeper had served the palace for 31 years. She went and found the king's steward and told him, in a controlled voice, that the new court medic was reorganizing things. The steward told the king. Calder said, "Let her." The steward opened his mouth. Calder looked at him. The steward closed his mouth and went away. She was in the guard's corridor at midnight when Calder found her, not looking for her. He did not sleep well. He had not slept well in many years, but this was not a thing he discussed with anyone. And he walked the palace at night, because movement was easier than lying still. He heard voices from the corridor, and turned the corner, and found her crouched beside a young guard who was sitting on the floor, with his back against the wall, and his wrist wrapped in a fresh bandage. She did not startle when Calder appeared. She looked up, assessed him the way she had assessed him in the throne room, practically, without theater, and held out a clean cloth. "Hold that," she said, turning back to the guard's wrist. Calder held it. The guard, whose name was apparently Bryn, watched his king follow the instruction of a medic at midnight and went very pale, not from his wrist but from the situation, and then decided with great wisdom that the best course of action was to say nothing at all about any of this. She asked Bryn about his family while she worked. Bryn had not been asked about his family by anyone in the palace, ever, not in 4 years of service. He talked for 11 minutes. He had a wife who made good soup, and a daughter who had recently learned to walk, and a mother-in-law who he was learning to understand. Calder stood against the wall with the cloth and did not speak, but something moved through his face while the guard talked, something that came and went quickly, like a hand passing over a lamp. Lyra caught it. She did not mention it. When she was done, she packed her satchel, and stood and looked at Calder directly, as she always did, without the particular quality of caution that everyone else used when looking at him. "You don't sleep," she said. "I sleep. You walk palace corridors at midnight. I sleep first." She looked at him for a moment in the way she looked at a patient's breathing, not unkindly, just accurately. Then she said, "Chamomile tea is not below your dignity," and walked away down the corridor. He stood there alone for a while. His wolf was making a sound he did not have words for. The council session happened on a Thursday. 5 of his 7 senior advisors had prepared a formal presentation with historical documentation, explaining, carefully, and with great political precision, that an Omega bonding with the Alpha King was not done, had not been done, could not, without significant consequence, be done. They were thorough. They had prepared for arguments. Calder let them finish, then he said nothing. He dismissed the session without ruling. It was the most frightening thing he had done in 11 years of power, because it meant he was still deciding. He found the garden at night. He usually did, when something was working at him too hard to stay indoors. The city spread below. All of Ashenveil. All the noise and weight and motion of it. The thing he was responsible for down to its last sleeping citizen. He sat on the stone bench near the old oak and looked at it. She sat down beside him without asking. He did not tell her to leave. For a while there was just the city, and the wind, and the sound of her breathing beside him, which was steady and unhurried. "Is it heavy?" she asked. "Everything is heavy." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. No one had ever asked twice. "Yes," he said. "It is very heavy." She nodded. She did not offer to take it from him. She did not tell him it would be easier. She just sat with him in the garden while the city did what it always did below them, without judgment and without false comfort, and after a long time she said plainly, the way she said everything, "I will always tell you the truth, even when you don't want it, especially then." His wolf broke open. Not loudly, not with drama, the way a window breaks, that has had pressure behind it for a long time, one moment whole, and then not, and all the air rushing through. 11 years of a thing held closed, coming open in the dark in a garden above a city, because a woman with ink on her hands and someone else's blood on her collar had promised him the one thing no one had ever thought to offer. Not love, not loyalty, not alliance. Truth. He did not reach for her that night. He did not speak. He sat with what had happened inside him and let it be what it was, and she sat beside him and let him, and that was enough. The political consequences arrived in an organized wave. 2 council members resigned with formal letters that were polite in tone and furious in implication. A neighboring Alpha Lord sent a messenger carrying a letter that was technically a greeting and functionally a warning. The court fractured cleanly, along a line that had always been there, those who served Calder out of fear, and those who had been, quietly, waiting to see what he was actually made of. Lyra came to him when she heard. She came at a reasonable hour, not at midnight, and she sat across from him at his desk and said, "They are not wrong about the cost." Her voice was the same as always, steady, clear, without performance. "What this breaks will take years to repair. Maybe longer. I am not worth that." He listened to all of it. His jaw worked. Then he said, quietly, "You promised to tell me the truth. You did not promise to decide it for me." She opened her mouth, closed it. The red ink, for once, ran out. He dissolved the designation hierarchy on a Monday. He stood before the full council, all 7 of them, plus 12 regional representatives who had been urgently summoned, plus 3 foreign observers who had come expecting something else entirely, and he dismantled, systematically and without apology, the architecture of 11 years. The designation laws that made Omega lesser and Alpha absolute, the bonding precedents that treated people as political currency, the old fear-built framework that had made his kingdom efficient and cost it something he had not had a word for until recently. He spoke in the same quiet final voice he always used. The room had the same stillness it always had when he spoke, but something in it was different, and the court felt it even if they could not name it. He sounded the same as always. He meant something completely different. When he was done, no one spoke for a long time. Then the youngest council member, a man of 26 who had been too terrified to speak in session for his entire 2 years of appointment, raised his hand and said he had some questions. Calder said, "Ask them." The man asked them. It was the first time in the history of that council chamber that questions had been welcomed. Everyone in the room was aware of this in a way they would spend weeks trying to articulate later. The bonding was private. There was no ceremony, no formal record, no audience. There was a room and 2 people, and the city outside the window doing what it always did. She put her hands on his face and looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly, practically, without fear, and his wolf, which had been still and watchful and half-starved for 11 years, lay down at last. Afterward, she told him something true immediately, something small and slightly unflattering about the way he had held the cloth that night in the guards' corridor, something about his grip being completely wrong for the purpose, which she had not mentioned at the time. He laughed. The sound was unfamiliar in his own chest, like a door opening in a house that had been locked so long it had stopped feeling like a door. Bryn, the guard with the healed wrist, was standing at his post 3 corridors away. He heard it. He went home that evening and told his wife, and his wife told the woman next door, and within a week, it had traveled through every level of the palace and down into the lower district and across 2 neighborhoods. The Alpha King of Ashenveil had laughed. No one had heard him laugh before. Half the city did not fully believe it. They spent a comfortable amount of time debating whether those 3 corridors had perhaps carried the sound of something else. The neighboring lord's letter was never answered. A second letter arrived 6 weeks later, noticeably less threatening. A trade proposal followed after that. The council began, slowly at first, to disagree, with each other, occasionally with Calder himself. He listened, he ruled. He was not always right about what he heard, and on 2 separate occasions, Lyra pointed this out in front of other people, clearly and without apology, and he said, "You're right," and moved on. And the people who witnessed this carried the story with them like something fragile and valuable. In the lower district, a child with a wrist wrapped in a neat bandage told her mother that the woman who had fixed it smelled like lavender and ink, and had not charged anything, and had asked her name before she asked about the wrist. The mother went to the market the next morning and told everyone she saw. In the palace, in a garden above a city that was slowly, carefully, learning to breathe, a man sat on a stone bench in the dark. He was not heavy anymore. Or rather, he was. The weight was the same. The city was the same. The responsibility was the same enormous, exhausting, permanent thing it had always been. But he was not carrying it alone. And his wolf, for the first time in 11 years, was not standing watch. It was resting,